All right, we have Jerry Gearding with us today. He's going to tell us all about his IT background and how this applies to the agenda that we're seeing and the education. Jerry, tell us about your background.
All righty. Thanks, Jill and Stacy, for having me on. I have been working in IT for probably a little over 25 years. I started in IT back in the days where you had a whole room of computer equipment that was less powerful than what you have in your phone today, where we used to hang, magnetic tapes and have big boxes of paper we would load in big printers, and it went from there. Personal computers first came out. I started getting interested in those. I've been involved with supporting those in big companies and so on. And then I finally got into databases because I've always, sort of been enamored with data and the power of having data and the things that you can do with it. So I've spent, probably the last 20 years focused on data, the last 10 years mostly on working with targeted marketing campaigns, utilizing data that we bought from third party providers. I will tell you everything that you do online and a lot of the things that you do offline are tracked and people sell that data and so on. So we would create targeted marketing programs both online and direct mail type things that would call out things that we thought different people would react to. A lot of what's involved with that today is predictive analytics, taking somebody's data and going in and sort of ranking the probability that they'll buy your product or service. And there's a lot that goes into that. Now they're using artificial intelligence and so on. So I've been involved with a lot of that lately. All of the different buzzwords that you've been hearing lately, machine learning, deep learning, things like that fall under the umbrella of artificial intelligence. Obviously, our artificial intelligence allows computers or machines or robots to mimic the capabilities of a human. It would make decisions, recognize objects, and theoretically solve problems and understand language. Machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence. It's what a lot of the things have been, until recent history, have been built with. It's centered on building applications that learn from data, improve their accuracy over time. For example, as we get data in on different people, we score them using an algorithm, which is a mathematical calculation or formula that, again, will tell you the probability somebody will do something or not. A lot of that was done with structured data. And you don't need a lot of data to do machine learning. But then, when you make those predictions, if you start noticing that some of them are correct, there's human intervention normally with that, where they'll go in and they'll change the formula. Well, that's where we've gotten into today, where a lot of the things that are being done, even Google with their search algorithms and some of the other things, gets into deep learning, which deep learning is a subset of machine learning that enables the computer to solve more complex problems. Deep learning requires a lot of data to do because it sort of trains itself and it doesn't have the human intervention. When it makes a mistake, it solves the reasoning behind making that mistake itself, when it makes future decisions. So that's one of the things that we're seeing today is, we have so many ways that people are collecting our data. And the reasoning behind that is so they can run those deep learning algorithms against all of that data. And they can even take in not only like text data, but voice data, video data, and they analyze all that and they store that to run with the algorithms. So a lot of the things that we're seeing today, as I mentioned, like the Google search and different things, even things like, when you get on Amazon and you buy things, the products they show you is done with deep learning.
The Chromebook is sold to parents as a deeper learning experience, that it's able to create personalized learning. And I feel like the verbiage is sold one way to parents, where their understanding of it is that their child's getting a deeper understanding or education. Can you
Right.
apply everything you just said to what that actually means the Chromebook is doing?
For the last around 10 years, there's been a big push to do a lot of the curriculum in schools and the teaching in schools using the Chromebook. The Chromebook acts as a data collection tool where they are tracking everything your student does as far as how long it takes to answer questions, what kind of things are they choosing to read. When you're given, hey, read one of these stories, it's pick one of the five. It tracks, which one you choose and sort of what the content behind that is, which is somewhat scary. They, as you guys have talked about in the past, they like to give surveys. They're collecting this data on kids as young as kindergarten or pre-K in some cases, putting that in what's called a student profile, which sort of collects your data for the entire time that you're in school throughout the time you're in school. So it doesn't just stop, at the end of the kindergarten and start again. It builds upon that. The scary part about it is eventually they want to utilize that data to steer kids in a certain direction, also give them a social credit score. And they will build upon that, and you will be allowed to go in a certain career direction depending on your social credit score, which has a lot of different things that go into it that aren't based solely on the grades you get in school or how you perform in school. It's how you perform on some of these surveys, and if you comply with some of their social emotional learning type things, where how you feel on certain social issues like gender identity and those types of things. Yeah, it's scary where they're going. But the other part about it is it's not only Google that's tracking this. There are so many companies out there that create software that are loaded on the Chromebooks, and then they collect data on your student, and they do psychological profiling and those types of things. And that all gets fed into the central student profile as well, or database. They are not only concerned with teaching your child to read and write and to do math. Nowadays, they want to social engineer your child to believe in the things they want them to believe in. Again, you're getting back into teaching kids what to think and not how to think, which, has upset quite a few parents, rightfully so.
I've talked to some other IT people about these particular items, and with the Chromebook and personalized learning, their response has been, yeah, that's a great idea, but it depends who's programming the algorithms. It depends who's programming those analytics, because
Right.
that's where it's going to steer what type of education this child's getting. And like you just said, engineering them into what to believe, but also the internet is disappearing through these companies. Like, they're taking out and only allowing certain information to live on the internet. So they're censoring other content, where they're able to create this hive mind globally, because this is a global agenda. If the Chromebooks
It
weren't
is.
just rolled out in the United States, but that it's able to sync up all of the children into believing a narrative globally, essentially, is what they're, I guess, trying to accomplish. But they were saying, this could basically be used for good or for evil based on who owns these programs and who's running the algorithms. And I think we all know who these companies are, and we've already seen their track record as far as censorship, gaslighting, changing the narrative, taking down things from the internet, or their fact checkers. I'm really concerned for what information they're gathering on the kids and then trying to engineer them for the future. Do you want to talk anything about the facial recognition and what kind of implications those are, and maybe even where you've seen that used?
We have all of this technology that is collecting data on us. I mean, the Chromebooks we just talked about. Camera on the Chromebook does facial recognition. It can make sure that it's your child that is doing the quiz or the test. And it even can go further than that and make determinations whether your child is happy or sad or upset. And I've even read articles to where that will be used if your child comes in to school upset enough times. That's reason enough to report the parents to Child Protective Services. So that's a scary part of that. But facial recognition is a scary, scary technology. And where we're going with a lot of what's happening in the world today, as you've heard in communist China, they've used facial recognition for a lot of different things. I mean, you are monitored everywhere you're at, even within your home. They have AI algorithms that will punish you if you do certain things. If, you might hang around with somebody with a low social credit score, that sort of ties into the facial recognition, and deduct things. Or if you jaywalk across the street, it will reduce, it knows who you are, so it'll reduce your social credit score. They do different things like put your picture up, I've seen on billboards, for breaking the law and things like that. But that type of technocracy is what we call that, is what they are building here in the United States today. We've seen a lot of this in different public areas. We have facial recognition cameras along the roads, in parks, in schools. We have Ring doorbells on how many houses now that have cameras. They're putting sensors in all of our electronic equipment, which will feed the Internet of Things, that all report back to a central database that will eventually calculate your social credit score. And then depending on what your social credit score is, you will be limited to the different things that you will be able to buy, where you'll be able to live, where you're allowed to travel, a lot of those different things that are scary. It's really scary to me when you walk in to a school and you see this type of technology in use. Again, we're going into a world where you will have no privacy. They're starting, and, a lot of people have asked me, they're like, why are they so gung-ho on targeting and collecting data on our children? And the reason is because they know that they can't just switch all of this surveillance on for everybody in the United States, because there's a lot of different generations that would not accept that. I'm one of those. Children, they're training them for the world that they believe they're going to grow up in, which is a world like communist China, where you don't have any privacy. Everything you do is watched and monitored, and all of your data goes to a central database where they run these algorithms and do artificial intelligence. I've even seen where, and this has been mentioned in the news as well, there are facial recognition applications, obviously, that you're going to need to have on your phone. You have them on your computer for getting any kind of, services from the state. So, for example, somebody's unemployed and they want unemployment benefits. You have to go through the facial recognition to get that. Yeah, it just brings up a whole lot of different privacy concerns, especially here in the United States with our Constitution and Bill of Rights, which is why they don't like to teach our kids today the Bill of Rights, because it's more about the rights of the community and the type of society they're planning for them than it is individual rights.
So I'm glad you brought up cybersecurity, because I've spent a lot of time watching Microsoft and ed tech leaders speak in forums about this lately. They said since 2020, K through 12 education has been the number one target for cyber attack. They said even if they have a system in place today that can protect the data they've already collected, they have no guarantees, because of how fast technology is advancing and evolving, that in 5 years that said data that they've collected would ever be safe. And they were also talking about digital citizenship as a class and teaching kids as young as kindergarten. They have a digital footprint or digital DNA, teaching them that anything that's created digitally never goes away. It follows you for life. And I'm just sitting here thinking as a parent, like, my child cannot comprehend that. So why are we exposing them to things that put them at risk when they can't even comprehend this?
I completely agree. You're correct. Anything that you do online is never going away. It's being tracked somewhere. I have that discussion with my son as well. It's like, you got to watch what you put out there. But eventually we're going to a society that everything you do is going to be tracked and safe because of all of this video surveillance that they're building out. I heard an interesting point a couple weeks ago that really made a lot of sense. They need the networking bandwidth to collect all of this data. You know how much you've heard lately, especially with the CARES Act money and a lot of the projects that are going on in the state, in counties or cities, about installing fiber optic broadband. Well, that's exactly why they're installing the fiber optic broadband. It's not only to get everybody to be able to access the internet, it gives them access to all of the different sensors and so on in your house. That's a scary point because I hear that a lot from our governor, from the judge executive here in my county, that, oh yeah, we're installing all of this broadband fiber optic cable. And that's why. It's to create this mass surveillance network to collect all of this data, which, as you brought up, is a concern because there really isn't such thing as a secure application or a secure database because there is always a back door built in for the government agencies. Those have been discovered before, and that's what people use to hack things. When you talk about the amount of data that they're storing about you, somebody could hack that data and know everything about you, which, is concerning. And we don't have strong enough data privacy laws here in the United States to protect that at this point. So, that's an area that needs to be shored up.
So one of the things I noticed going through one of the applications that my son's school uses, I actually read the terms and conditions on the privacy, and it took me to one company called Anthology.
Yeah.
And then Anthology had hundreds of global partnerships with other tech companies that exist even outside of the United States. I mean, there were things like Amazon servers, AWS, and biometric ID were just a couple of examples that were partnered with this particular app. So my question is, does that mean that those companies then also get the data that this one company is gathering?
Well, there would be individual agreements between those companies, but more than likely, yes, they're getting some of that private data, and it is being stored out of the United States. Quite frankly, a lot of companies will store data outside of the United States to bypass the laws that we have here. So that's why you'll see a lot of that. So that is definitely a concern. Again, I think you bring up a good point. It's not only the big companies like Microsoft and Google and Facebook that are storing this type of data. There are a ton of third-party companies that get this data. And there are a ton of quote unquote nonprofits that are getting our data that receive contracts from our government. So they're taxpayer funded nonprofits that are getting this data and doing this tracking and monitoring of us. And that's a huge problem here, not only in Kentucky, but in the United States. When you look at the definition of fascism, that was a term that was created by Mussolini, and his original word for that was corporatism, because it's the merging of corporations and the government and creating that type of power structure. So a lot of the things that the government itself wouldn't be able to do, they contract out to nonprofits and corporations to do things that aren't quite constitutional. For example, censoring our social media. That's a First Amendment violation for the government to do it, but when it's done by what they call a private corporation, it's allowed.
How do we protect our kids?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that we can do, and I've heard you guys talk about this as well, is we need to stop the data collection and the data mining of our kids. What happens is a lot of parents don't pay attention to the things the schools send home, and they don't read a document that might come with the Chromebook that says, hey, we're going to collect all this data on your child. Are you okay with it? And they sign it. I think you guys have been advocates of opting out of Chromebooks and those types of things and surveys. I've seen some great legislation in other states about forming parents about the surveys and so on that they give your child in schools. And I think you've mentioned this, Stacy, that, there are people who will ask for those surveys on paper first. The parent is aware of what's going on. Stopping the data collection is a big thing, but also parents need to pay attention. We have far too many parents who don't. That's why they do it, because they get away with it. And you might have 10% of the parents who might question it, 90% who don't. That is scary.
What I noticed is when they send in Boone County, when they send the Chromebook user agreements home, it actually doesn't talk about data collection. It basically says if you break it, you buy it.
Wow.
And yeah, the only way a parent would know what data is being collected and who has it is if they get the actual contracts between the school board and these particular tech companies, where the schools have made the tech company agents of the school as
Yep.
employees, and they're usurping parental rights altogether. They're not even asking the parents about collecting data on their kids.
Wow. And again, that's another point that we've heard a lot in the last year or two, how important it is for us to get conservatives on school boards that can watch out for these types of agreements, and for parents to go to the school board meetings and pay attention and call these things out. Yeah, it's scary because, when the internet first came out, we had a lot of strict rules about collecting data from children. Your child could not sign up for certain services on the internet if they were under 13. That seems to have just gone out the door, and they want to collect data from every child as early as they can. I mean, again, that's another reason we have the big push for the mandatory pre-kindergarten. It's scary. Anything that they do early in life will follow them the rest of their life. And luckily, we grew up in a time where that didn't happen. But today, it's your digital footprint, which sort of ties into your digital identity, which is another direction they want to go, will follow you the rest of your life. Yes, that is a scary thought for our children to have to grow up in a society like that, where they have no privacy, they have no individual rights. And in my mind, it's a form of digital slavery that we need to try to fight back against.
Are you able to speak to what the Internet of Bodies is?
The Internet of Bodies is a way of trying to merge artificial intelligence with sort of biometric intelligence, which would be having sensors or microchips or so on, either worn outside of your body like a smartwatch, or a microchip that might be inserted under your skin. Those are, again, more data collection devices. Initially, they will be data collection devices where they'll be sending your biometric data, how fast your heart's beating, what your body temperature is, those types of things. And then eventually these global elites at the World Economic Forum foresee a form of transhumanism where the machine and the body will work together. So AI will help you make decisions, which is, scary because they can dictate at that point what decision they want you to make. That is well documented. While it sounds like a theme from a horror movie, it is well documented by the World Economic Forum that they want to implement transhumanism in their fourth industrial revolution. You can see the signs of that happening. There was 2 weeks ago a Project Veritas expose where a Pfizer employee admitted that they were doing directed evolution of viruses so that they could change and create new strands of a virus so they could sell more vaccines. It was interesting to hear that they were using the term directed evolution because when you Google directed evolution, it tells you that directed evolution is transhumanism. I mean, these people believe that they can act like God and change people through DNA editing. You're seeing a lot of that with the mRNA vaccine, and then connect that person to a computer. Yes, it's a very, very scary thing. But again, it goes back to the whole thing. To train these machine learning algorithms or these deep learning algorithms for artificial intelligence, they have to have data. You need a lot of data. So again, the Internet of Bodies would, again, send all of your biometric data to them as well.
So I just want to make it clear to the parents, deeper learning is referring to better quality data for the machine to learn your child, not for your child to get a deeper learning experience. I just want to make sure that's clear with the audience.
When you start going down some of these rabbit holes, it goes in so many different directions, and there's so many companies involved, government agencies and nonprofits. And when you go back and you look at 17 sustainable development goals of the UN, a lot, you can see where they all plug in. The scary part, it's our own government who are implementing these things, and many of them are unconstitutional. At that point, you wonder how much money they're getting to do this. I mean, even at the state level, for example, Friedlander, who runs the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, he formerly worked for the Rockefeller Foundation. So he's in charge of CPS and all of the social type services. You have Stephen Stack, the head of public health. He was president of the American Medical Association, even though he was just an emergency room doctor. But then he was also involved with the WHO and the World Medical Association, again, pushing the vaccine agenda as a globalist. And then you have my favorite guy of them all, Mr. Jason Glass. It's no surprise that he was an appointee of President Obama. I don't know if you guys saw the hearing last week where he got up again and said there is no gender ideology or critical race theory or any of that happening in our schools. It's all about implementing the agenda. They don't give a damn about the kids. They don't give a damn about the parent. Implementing all these agendas that will, again, in my mind, create a digital prison for people.